If you want to see the faces of the housing crisis in this country, look no further than Brisbane's tent city. Here are families, some who have never been homeless before, now forced to pitch a tent and sleep rough. It's a blight on society when children and babies are on the streets. Children and babies. And it's happening in Queensland Premier Stephen Miles's own electorate. Does he drive past and give him a wave each day? It's so bad, there are fears it will turn into a US-style tent city. Q Shelter Executive Director Fiona Canilla told the Courier Mail, "We don't have enough homes to meet demand. And when that happens, when rental vacancy rates are as low as 1% or even lower, then there simply isn't enough homes in the market for everyone who needs one." Well, homelessness is a growing problem across the country because of a lack of affordable accommodation. But here is the real issue. The federal government is literally making people homeless as migration numbers soar once again. Australia's migration intake hit record numbers in January. 125,000 permanent and long-term arrivals landed, the highest on record. The net growth in permanent and long-term arrivals came in at just over 55,000, or 40% higher than the highest January intake ever previously recorded, all the way back in 2009. And that is off the back of a record 500,000 arrivals last year. This is a disaster in the middle of a cost of living crisis and shows just how out of touch Labor is with the rest of the country. Today, businessman Dick Smith called for a population plan to limit growth to about 75,000 a year. And here he was on my show, The Jury, warning the government about this exact issue just last month.
At the present growth rate from the huge immigration, we're going to end up at 100 million people in Australia when our grandkids will still be alive at the end of this century. Now, no one believes 100 million is sensible for an arid country like Australia.
Well, it's not, yet in February our population hit 27 million, nearly 2 decades earlier than expected. It means one new person is added to the population every 50 seconds. And at the same time, rental vacancies are at an all-time low. Renters face several more years of rising rents and intense competition to put a roof over their heads as the national rental vacancy rate fell to a fresh low in February of 1.07%, with a level lower than 1% in 3 of the capital cities. These latest shocking numbers come despite the federal government pledging last year to wind back migration numbers. Fast forward a few months and the numbers have gone up. They've gone the other way. And families are pitching tents in Brisbane because they are being squeezed out of the housing market. The government's lack of policy is squarely to blame.
The issue here is a lack of planning. The schools, the roads, and particularly the housing, the rental market is so tight that not only can young Australians really not afford to even buy a house, they can't even rent one at the moment. So the government has put the cart before the horse.
And it's clear Labor has no idea how to get migration numbers under control, and calls are rightly mounting for urgent action.
These numbers are higher than the record numbers we had under Kevin Rudd when he was pursuing his Big Australia policy. And it once again shows that Anthony Albanese is pursuing a Big Australia policy.
Well, it should be at least half from the record levels. So the record level was over 500,000. In the 3 years before COVID, the average was about 248,000 a year. In the decade for that, it was often below 200,000. So there is still scope to cut further.
Migration is becoming an acute vote-driving issue because no one ever voted for a Big Australia, and yet we are paying the price for it while the government has its foot on the accelerator. It was not front and centre at the last federal election. There was no policy to get immigration back to the long-term average. And now we're in a crisis. It's an uncomfortable truth to talk about record high immigration levels and a debate few are willing to have. But the sooner we have that debate, the sooner we can get people into homes and off the streets.